Ladies and gentlemen, this is the new episode of Business Storytelling with Artem Mushin-Makedonskiy, and I have a very special guest for you today. Here with me is Murray Nossel, the founder of Narativ and the author of an amazing book on storytelling and listening and their combination, which we will cover today, called Powered by Storytelling. Murray, you've been working in storytelling for really a lifetime, and I'm really pleasant that you're here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Artem. I've so enjoyed our conversations leading up to this interview, and it's really a pleasure for me to talk to you. And I'm so curious about the specific interest you have in storytelling and how it applies to Russia. It's of great interest for me.
Great. We will touch on that, of course. And I would like to start with a short story of your method and my experience using it. It's called The What Happened. And for all you folks watching this, basically, in simple words, if you tell a good story, if you tell a story at all, you have to focus on what happened. The 5 senses, that's all the camera and all the people can see, and they can make their sense of what happened. Like, you don't see emotions, you don't see thoughts, you don't see some interpretations, you just see the what happened. And my experience, as I've listened to your book, I've implemented this to my work, and it was amazing because one of my main training groups, a woman called Elena, she is, I would say 50 plus, she's stunning, she's really beautiful, and she's working as a stylist. So Yelena comes up front, and I ask her to tell a story of how she became the stylist for women who are 40 plus years old. And she starts talking. She says, well, Artem, in every woman's life, there comes a time when an organism changes in a way, and it causes trouble. And, you know, every woman suffers from that, and it's tough for every woman. And I keep hearing it, and the audience, I can see that the audience is falling a bit apart. And after that, I tell Lena, can you tell me and the audience what happened that made you into a stylist? She goes silent for a second, and then a tear comes up into her eye. She goes out of the audience, and everyone is in shock. And 3 women just from that moment, they were like, wow, now we're engaged, like we feel it. And then she came back and she settled down we took the time. And then she told the story of how she was on a vacation in Croatia in a big hotel. It was an event for the elderly. And she heard a speaker say that after 50, your life only begins. It doesn't end there. It's a new beginning. And she was expressing so much what she heard and how she felt, that everyone around her truly believed that this woman knows why she's doing, and she's doing something that she's doing from the depth of her heart. So that was one of the most incredible emotional moments and the most incredible story I've heard from a person. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Artem. So what happened of her story is that she went to Croatia, and there was this meeting that was happening where people were talking about life beginning at 50. And then how does her story end? She comes back home and...
Yeah, she came, I've shortened it so we don't take much time. So she comes back home, and she just resought her clothing. She took some out, bought some little bit of new in, and she thought, I have all this stuff, and it just doesn't match, so I'll just regroup it. And she saw it for herself, and she said it out loud in her flat. She said, I'm not the only woman that has this in her life. I have to help them. And from that day, she became a stylist. Well, in a matter of weeks.
Okay, so the big emotional turning point, or the dramatic turning point, is going to Croatia. And listening to that talk, that speech, which changed her perspective.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Right?
Thank you
Terrific.
so much. Murray, I have several questions I would like to discuss with you today. And the first one is actually about your listening techniques. And in your book, you um, look very precisely at listening, as it's the reciprocity between listening and telling. And
Yeah.
you give an amazing exercise to counter and acknowledge and leave behind the listening blocks. And what I would like to ask you is, how can I, not in an exercise but in my everyday life, leave behind those listening blocks? Is there any clue I can do that?
Okay, great. Okay, so Artem, obviously, all of us are engaged when we are talking to one another in a reciprocal relationship between listening and telling. So even in this moment, the very fact that I'm speaking is totally dependent on the fact that you're listening. So if you were to suddenly disappear from the screen that I'm looking at you in at the moment, I would stop talking because I would wonder to myself, is anybody actually listening, right? So I compare listening to a bowl, and speaking is like a liquid. Now, in just the same way that the bowl gives the liquid its shape, so does listening shape the telling, okay?
Yeah.
So your listening is currently not only allowing me to speak, but it's in some way shaping what I'm saying. So what I'm saying to you right now and the way that I'm saying it has never happened before because I've never had Artem's listening in this moment. And even the way you might have listened to me a week ago is different from the way that you're listening to me now, because we've already exchanged some information. I know more about you, you know more about me. You've read my book. So your listening has changed from the first time that we ever met. The shape of the listening has changed. Now, we know, indeed, especially in this kind of age that we're living in at the moment, there is so much technology. The technology, even while I'm sitting here talking to you, I have to disengage all the little pop-ups that come on my computer screen. I had to turn off my cell phone, my mobile phone, right? I had to make a lot of provisions to make sure that I wasn't going to get interrupted. Because it's those interruptions that get in the way of our ability to listen. So we are talking here about the reciprocal relationship between listening and telling. Listening creates the telling, telling creates the listening. In order for me to be able to share a story with you, I need to know that you are really listening. And in order for you to share a story with me, I need to know that you need to know that I'm really listening to you, okay?
Yeah.
So what is listening? Let's think about it. We can think about ideal listening, right? Think about ideal listening as a clear blue sky. There's nothing in it. It's pure listening. Well, that's very difficult for us to imagine because what comes into the sky? A cloud, a bird, an aeroplane, something comes into that blue sky. Same with our listening. We're listening very intently, but all sorts of things can happen that will get in the way of your listening. Let's take some examples. Physiological things. So let's say I've got a terrible headache today, or I've got a toothache, or my toes hurting. It's going to make it more difficult for me to listen to you because something's getting in the way, right? Now, I don't know what it's like in Moscow right now, but in New York, we've had 100-degree weather for the past week. If it was so hot today, that would be getting in the way of my listening, right? The temperature, that's an external factor. Or I'm right on the river at the moment. If a big ship was coming down the river and, you know, making its sound, it would get in our way. That's an external thing. But then there are other things, Artem, that get in the way of our listening. Things like emotions and thoughts. So as you mentioned earlier, the story about this woman who was having a lot of emotions that were not being expressed. And when you asked her to tell her story, the emotion came up. And that made it possible for her now to be able to be present and all the other women in the group to be present. So sometimes emotions are an obstacle to listening. Thoughts can be an obstacle to listening too. So if I'm sitting here thinking about all the other things I have to do today, that's going to be an obstacle to my listening. So what do we do about this? That's what you're asking, right? How do we manage this? Well, if it's external, you have to manage the situation before you go into the storytelling environment. I call this a dedicated listening environment, right? You have to create your dedicated listening environment first, which means you want to make sure that all external obstacles are minimized. If there's a noise outside, close the window. I said to you before, it's very bright in my place here. So I pulled down the sunshade so that the brightness wouldn't get in the way of your listening. If you've got a headache or a toothache, take an aspirin, do something, you know, that will help you with your pain. But what's more complicated now are those emotions and those thoughts, right? What do we do when those things are blocking our ability to listen? Now, one of the things, Artem, is that this takes a tremendous amount of self-awareness. Many people don't actually know that they're feeling something. They may feel as a sort of a slightly bad mood or slightly depressed, but they don't really know what the feeling is. So we need to be able to get into ourselves and with self-awareness, really examine how are we feeling, right? Now, one of the ways in which I teach people how to do this is to quite literally close their eyes. I mean, we can even do this right now, Artem, and those listening will be able to follow. So close your eyes, if you will.
Okay, let's do this.
So just bring your attention to your body that's now currently sitting on a seat. And bring your awareness to all the places where your body is making contact with this seat. And just rest your awareness there. And now bring your awareness to your breath. The breath is going to be the most important aspect here, because it's through the breath that we are actually able to release these obstacles to listening. So let's say that right now a thought comes up in your mind. Like, what's this guy doing anyway? I mean, who sits on a cross-continental interview with their eyes closed? This guy's weird. So you notice that coming up in your thoughts. You recognize it. You recognize the emotion behind it. You see there's a little bit of judgment there, right? But what you want to do is you want to be completely open to what I'm going to say. You want to clear the obstacle out of your listening. So the first step is to be very aware of what's going on inside your mind and inside your body in terms of thoughts and emotions as you are sitting here with your eyes closed. Now I'm just going to leave this for 30 seconds and let's just sit here in silence just for 30 seconds. And then I'm going to ask you, Artem, what were you aware of during the silence? What obstacles to listening were you aware of? Okay, let's open our eyes. And tell me, what did you become aware of as you were examining what's in your listening?
You know, actually, I got aware of my headphones and that they are a slightly different sitting in my ears, and it's irritating me. It was like a small mosquito, but I didn't know where it was coming from. But just let me, let me clear it up. I guess the rubber, yeah, the rubber went off. Like it does sometimes, like it's a separate thing, but I didn't recognize it, and now I feel it. That's amazing. I felt the temperature around me, the lamp that's up there. You can see it in my face right now. And I felt that it's making my back a bit more warm than my forehead. And it's this difference of temperature. I don't know if it's an obstacle, but I felt it. And I felt my legs in different positions, so I switched them a bit actually, because one was really uncomfortable and I wasn't aware of it. It's really strange. It's wonderful. Thank you. That's a great exercise.
You're so welcome. And all we are doing is just bringing our awareness to our listening. That is the most important thing. And if you think about this irritation that was going on, if you're not aware of it, it's just going to keep going, right? And you're just going to be tolerating it. Now, what do you think happens to your listening if you're just sitting there tolerating it?
Well, yeah, it's getting in the way. I just wanted to, yeah, exactly.
And perhaps the thought that you're having at that moment is, well, I better not do anything because I can't stop the interview, or I can't interrupt the interview to deal with this. So you just push on rather than acknowledging. So now I would assume that you're more present.
It really feels that way. Thank you. Well, I wouldn't propose to start again, but I guess it will go better from this moment on.
Yes, and again, you made those adjustments. And so tell me, from the perspective of you sitting in Moscow and this exercise that I've just done with you, how does it land for you? Does it seem slightly strange or unfamiliar to be self-aware in that kind of way?
You know, actually, it's not, because I'm mirroring this for the business world at the same time that I'm thinking about it. And the way you put it is to make your story more efficient and to make the storytelling process better. It's just a part of the thing. You don't say like go meditate or go be self-aware. It's just an instrument, and in this way it's really I don't feel any anxiety like, oh my god, no, this is creepy, I'm sitting in a cafe with my iPod. It's so strange. I don't feel it. I feel engagement. I feel value.
Very good. Amazing. Great. So it's the way that the exercise is being framed that makes it accessible.
Great. That's great. That's amazing. Well, now I know a lot better how to deal with the listening blocks and barriers. And I would propose moving to the next question, which is about a different exercise that you have in your book, and it's called the Grandparent exercise. And I would like you to describe it shortly for our listeners, and then I will pose the question that came up to my mind. Do you mind?
Of course not, Artem. Okay, so the exercise is pretty simple. What you do is I always work in groups. So I bring a group of people together. It can be a group of 12 people, it can be a group of 20 people, and sometimes I deal with hundreds of people. And when I'm dealing with hundreds of people, I bring a group of people onto the stage, a circle onto the stage, so everyone can watch them. Now, the basis of this exercise is that people are often asked in groups to introduce themselves. Let's go around the circle and introduce ourselves. And I realized that when I asked people to do that, they often come up with very stereotyped things that they've said before. Hi, I'm Murray. I come from South Africa. I have a communications and media consultancy in New York City. We've got a branch in London. It's very monotonous. I've said it 1,000 times before, and people tend to just catch a few things, but it's not very inspiring. And certainly the way that people start to listen is with a kind of a boredom or predictability. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that I could give something that really created a powerful listening environment. So the first thing that I do with the people in that group is I ask everybody to really tune into their listening. And then I tell people that listening is a gift. To truly listen to another person, to make the time and space, and to clear out your obstacles is a gift. Now, given this gift, I'm asking you to introduce yourself, not as yourself, but as one of your 4 grandparents. And everybody in the group goes, what am I going to say? Which grandparent am I to choose? You know, there's an immediate anxiety, you see, because people weren't expecting that. And then I say, okay, who's starting? And remember, this is an exercise about listening. You are giving the gift of listening to the person who's telling their story. The priority, the focus, the demand, the responsibility is not on the storyteller. It's on the listener, right? The listener is responsible for creating that container that will allow this grandparent's story simply to come up and be expressed. So that is the instruction of the exercise. Tell a story about one of your 4 grandparents in the first person. In other words, I. Now, I have a little surprise for you, Artem. It turns out that my grandmother was from Russia.
Oh, you don't say.
And I don't know how well you can see it.
Oh my
But there's
God.
a photograph of my grandmother.
She's at the piano?
She is the one who's in the dark dress standing next to the piano.
Oh, she's so beautiful.
And this photograph is taken in Kazan. So you can understand why, for me, talking to you in Russia is such a thrill for me today, because that is my grandmother right there. So if you like, I'll tell you a story about my grandmother right now in the first person, because I'll be talking to you and I've never had your listening before.
You have all of my listening right now.
Okay, so Artem, I'm going to ask you just to give me 3 minutes, okay? And cut me off at the end of 3 minutes. So this is part of the exercise that we always give a time limitation. Now you have to remember that I have never told this story before, because I'm talking into your listening. And not only am I talking into your listening, but I'm talking to a person in Russia. And that is the most incredible opportunity that technology now gives us. Okay? So
that's great. Okay, you have my listening and you have my timer just to cut you off.
Shall I begin? Well, hello everybody. My name is Anne Schaefer. And I'm talking to you from heaven at the moment because I've been dead for a very long time. But I'd like to tell you about my journey through life. You see, I was born in the Russian Empire in a town called Utena, which is currently in Lithuania. And I'm Jewish, and the Jews had quite a hard time, but luckily the Tsar of Russia made life much easier for the Jews, and he said you could come and travel anywhere around the Russian Empire that you like. So I and my mother went and wanted to leave that place. We didn't like it very much. And so we got on a train, and together we traveled to the wonderful city of Kazan. Oh, when I got to Kazan, I had never seen anything so beautiful before. The buildings with these domes on top of them, the music, the culture, the people, everyone was so well read. I felt that my eyes were suddenly open to the whole world coming to this city of Kazan. And my mother and I opened up a hat shop. You see, in those days, the ladies all wore the most beautiful hats. So we opened a hat shop, and oh, we were so happy in that city of Kazan. We went to the opera. We went to concerts. I wanted so badly to be an opera singer myself. I have to tell you, I was very beautiful, with white skin, white as snow, and big blue eyes. And I imagined myself on the stage singing, but life changed. My father knew that things were going to be changing in Russia and a revolution was coming. And he worried that things would be very bad for the Jews. And so he went to the far away country of South Africa. Who ever heard of such a place? South Africa. Where is that? My mother told me that my father had called for us and we had to go to South Africa. I sat on that train and I looked out the window as Kazan disappeared from my view. And all of my life after that, I told my grandson, Murray, those were the best years of my life. That's where I learned about beauty. That's where I learned about music. I never became an opera singer, but I had a daughter in South Africa. My oldest daughter became a concert pianist. And so she is the joy and pride of my life. And my grandson, can you imagine that my grandson right now, Murray, is talking to a man in Moscow, in Russia, my country of my heart.
Wow, that was beautiful. And you know, I actually lost the sense of not only the timer, but of the presence in this time zone. And I'm not talking about the GMT +3. I'm talking about the 21st century.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So that's how the grandparent exercise works, Artem. And I very rarely tell stories like that myself, but you know, I really felt like, given your listening, I would try it. Would you like to try it, Artem?
You know, I have actually a question / a doubt in my own abilities to tell this story because, and let me describe it first, or you would like to hear the story first?
No, go ahead, describe it.
Okay, so the thing is, I don't know my grandparents so well. I know that well, I was raised in a family without a father, so I am 2 grandparents below, like a statistic person. Yeah, I'm joking about it this way. And I know one of my grandparents went to war and never came back, and that's all I know about him. That he was on the plane, and that's it. And my second grandparent, Boris, I know a bit about him, but I don't know his life story. Like I remember, I have some cloaks, some pieces of memories when we interacted, and it was amazing. that I don't think that I have like a big story of his life, or even a story about him. Actually, I have a story about him interacting with me. So it doesn't work for this exercise.
Oh, it does.
Oh.
Okay. So you've got some kind of preconception about the way that the exercise should go, and that preconception is getting in your way. Okay. So I think the best thing is for us to try, Artem.
Okay. Okay.
So all right. So now the first thing that I want to do, Artem, here is I want to really assure you that I am listening to you. Okay. You have my complete listening, right? I am totally not distracted. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my mobile phone just so I can time you.
Okay.
Very important here. The fact that you know that this is only 3 minutes means that you've only got 3 minutes to fill here. You've got no more than 3 minutes, okay? So I'm setting my timer for 3 minutes. And now I want you to totally forget about anything apart from the fact that I'm listening to you, right? And you're going to now talk in the first person, right? So you're going to say, my name is Boris, right? And you're going to tell me anything about you that you like. Anything, okay? All you've got to fill is 3 minutes. But you can say anything as long as you keep it in the I. Are you ready?
Yeah, I am. Okay.
Let's go.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Boris. I am Artem's grandfather from his mother's line, and I've lived all my life in Russia, and I'm long gone. I've lived my life as an engineer, and I've been working with rocket science and rocket technology. And for the most part, I didn't share a lot of that with my family because it was mostly top secret projects, given that I was living in the USSR at the time. And I really love my family. I have two beautiful daughters, Ekaterina and Natalia, and they are very different. Natalia is very family oriented, and I really like that about her. And Katerina is more work oriented. She's very self-esteemed, and I'm proud of her in that way. Um, I've lived my whole life in Moscow, and it's been a pleasure to work and live there. I live near a station with a big forest park, and sometimes my grandson Artem came to visit, and we went to the park. And I actually remember how him and I were traveling through the park, and we sat down in a horse carriage. And that was the day my grandson discovered that he was allergic, and I drove him to the hospital because it turned out that he had an allergy to horse. And it was so scary. I was so nervous about him, but it turned out okay. I really loved playing chess with him after we went to the park because I was really good at chess. Well, in my grandson's eyes anyway. And I would often joke that someday he will grow up and beat me, even if all my figures are still on the chessboard, without me giving him any step backs or flag ups. And I got really sick in the end of my life, and that sickness just brought me to the hospital where it was very fast that I turned to heaven. And the last thing I did to my grandson is I gave him my medals for the rocket science. They are very special, and he now holds onto them as I watch him from up there. So, yeah, that's basically my story. Hope you liked it.
Okay, that's 3 minutes.
Really?
You're done.
Oh,
That's,
wow.
that's 3 minutes. So Artem, you told a grandparent story.
Wow.
You told a complete grandparent story. It's. I know so much about your grandfather now and about you just
Really?
from listening to the story.
Wow. That was something. That's strange because that instance with the horse, I remember it very bright because it was really a hard one. But I haven't remembered the chess party afterwards. And I just went through it, and it just came to my mind as a picture. And it's something magical that we just go through life and remember things. This is a great exercise.
Artem, it's not only magical, it's also neurological. So I'll explain to you how it works. You have my listening, right? I'm listening to you. How did my listening seem to you when you were talking to me?
It was very inclusive. Like you were inviting me to tell, and even if I interrupted, you were like, "Okay, well, go on, go on. It's fine."
Okay, so you felt secure and confident that you had my listening. Now, the way that memory works is that when a memory comes to the surface and those synapses, those memory synapses are firing, if you have a very open mind and if you know that you're being listened to, memories are attached to other memories because our body remembers everything that happened to us. So when I'm giving you this perfect opportunity just to remember, that's all I'm asking you to do. I'm not asking you to do anything else here. That memory of the horse is attached to the memory of the chess. And so it's able to bubble up to the surface. And that's what this exercise is all about. If you are just given the freedom to describe, to tell the story, any story you like about your grandparent, the memory takes care of everything. In fact, I would go so far as to say that you could have taken up 3 minutes just talking about chess if you really went down that memory. But I have a full sense of your grandfather. I have a good sense of your relationship with him. I have an interesting historical sense of the Soviet Union, that this guy was working in this rocket factory and he couldn't talk about it because it was top secret. And there you are, his grandson, and he's got a grandfather who's working with rockets. That's got to be a pretty cool thing for a kid, for a boy. But you know it about it. So it tells you something about the history, about the culture, about your relationship with him. I learned so much about you from that exercise. So tell me, what are your doubts about this exercise? What are you concerned about?
I was actually concerned about telling a good story. Like I gave you the what happened in several episodes, and I feel that that was enough. Like I truly feel that it is a story in a sense. But my concern here is that some people in Russia, given the culture and the time context, they have limited access to their grandparents. Many of them were they died in the World War II, and my wife, for example, she has a limited access to her father's grandparents, who are she just doesn't know her line up there, and because of some cultural context. They from his side they were Jewish, so it was kind of tough for the culture to get through and for stories to get through. And the second thing here is that sometimes I meet people who had a strong conflict from their parents to their grandparents. And their parents are so afraid of their grandparents influencing their own children that they block out the stories from the upper generation entirely. Like they don't tell anything And people just say, well, I had a grandfather or grandmother, and that's it. So my question is, to take it into one sentence, can we do anything about a situation where a person goes like, well, I don't know anything. Well, I had a grandparent, but that's all I know.
We all know something. I have been doing this exercise since 1994. I have done this exercise around the world. I've done it with Russians and Poles and people from the previous Eastern Bloc countries. I've done it with many countries where there are exactly what you're talking about. People went to war. Germany, Holland, the United Kingdom. With a certain generation of person, you always hit World War II. That's exactly, the grandparents were from World War II. But we can just, a little bit of information. What was this person's name? Where were they born? What war did they go to? Where did they fight? And then we can always say, what were their children like? What were their children's names? And then we can go into the conflict. At one point, my son stopped talking to me. We had been fighting for so long that he didn't want anything to do with me. And he didn't want his children to have anything to do with me. So we can take all the absences, Artem, we can take everything that didn't happen, and we can turn that into the story. Because surely what we're trying to do now is to unblock those blockages. And sometimes we just have to acknowledge what we don't know. But you can put that into your story. You can even say in your story, you know, my name is Boris, and I don't know where I died. And I don't know where I was born. And I don't know what happened to my grandchildren. So that the person who's telling the story becomes aware of what they don't know. But what we're trying to do through this exercise is to reveal and expose the stories that have got lost. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So it always works, always. And sometimes I have to prod a little bit. So someone says they don't know anything. I say, well, okay, let's try with you. Okay, do you know anything about your father, Artem?
Well, I do. His name was Igor, and he left when I was already born. And I've recently, I'm not sure that he is the person, but I've recently seen him on the website of a yoga center. So he's a yoga master, and he teaches at some kind of center. So yeah, that's.
So look at what you already know. And now there's an opening for you, Artem. You can choose to track this person down and even go and talk to them if you like, or not, right? But what we are doing here is we're reconnecting people to their sense of continuity with their history. And I think that, you know, well, you can tell me, you know, the fact that you did come from this very secretive society, which was potentially very repressive in some ways. What do you think happened to the sense of continuity for people as the USSR changed over to Russia?
Well, it's obvious to me that in most families, it just broke the continuity. Yeah. So
you have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I will need your help because it's a big country. Yeah. So thank you so much. This was a great experience. I really the deeper we dig, the deeper it gets. It's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Okay, Murray, on to the next question. And that's more like a discussion from me, and it's not based on your book, actually. I have a little concept of my own that I use in my work. Yeah. In a sense, people are coming to a storytelling training here in Russia to get the influence out of a story. They know that a story is a great influencer, and they go to learn how to influence people. And that's like the basic level. And at this basic level, people always want an algorithm, like a structure or a strict answer, what a story is and how do you unfold it. And what I've come up with is a small structure called story and meta story. And it's quite easy if you think about it. A story is basically what happened, like everything that happened. And a meta story, it includes your intention, the moral, the lesson, and your inspiration for the people. And basically, what I do is I say you can go from the story upwards. You can remember a story in your life and then ask everyone around you, what's the moral? What intention can it get stuck to? Or you can use an intention and then dig down to your memories and go find a story and stick them together and find a moral through the other people. So my question here is, how does that concept of two levels work with you? And if there is any preference, which way would you choose in a story work? Going from a story to the moral, or going from an intention like sell or lead or teach to the story that you need? Like, is there any difference to you?
Well, absolutely, Artem. Okay, so you've read my book or you've listened to my book, and you will know that the first chapter of my book is the question, why story, why now? Okay, so I have to know why I'm telling a story and why now is the moment to tell my story, right? So potentially, you've decided that you want to sell something, right? You want to influence with a story. So what you want to do is tell a story about how and why your product works, right? If you want to sell.
Yeah.
But now I want to hear you just telling me that your product works and 3,000 people like it. I want you to tell me a story of something that happened that communicates to me the success of your work so that other people buy it. I don't want you to give me the moral of the story. Because if you give me the moral of the story, you're taking that away from me. We are all hardwired in our brains to understand stories. You want to tell a story so that the moral and the message lands in my brain. You don't want to tell me what that moral and message is, because that's just going to make my brain lazy, and I'm not going to really be listening. When you tell what happened with a beginning and a middle and an end, that's going to engage my brain. And then I'm left to come up with the conclusions for myself. And then you can tell me, so, Artem, what did you get out of my story? What did you learn from my story? Put it back on the audience again and listen to them talk to you about the moral. Let them tell you about the message. But you are only telling them the facts of the case, so it's very, very objective. And so for me, a story is only a sequence of sensory information, in other words, the 5 senses, that goes from a beginning through a turning point to an end. And it's always best if that turning point is something that's dramatic. Because I want to see, this is classic story structure, I want to see how my hero gets through the obstacle, right? So that's always a good story. Somebody wants something gets in their way, and then it's by overcoming that obstacle that we get to the conclusion, we get to the end. So it's probably best if I use an example, a business example, to demonstrate to you what I'm talking about. So as an example from my book, we have a company, a pharmaceutical company, that's got a bit of a problem. And the problem is that the scientific researchers are very scientific, very technical, and they have to communicate the information about how these drugs work to the salespeople. But the salespeople don't understand what the scientists are talking about, really. And the salespeople have to go and sell the medications to the doctors. So we were now working with the scientific researchers and seeing how we could get them to tell personal stories that would somehow communicate the value of what the drugs that they were working on. And here we had a Chinese doctor who tells us the story about her father, who was a doctor in China. And many patients would come and see the father overnight, in the middle of the night. They would come on their bicycles and they would come and see him. And he always saw the patients. He was always ready to see them, even if they gave him some eggs or some milk as a reward. For he always saw the patients. Anyway, eventually that father developed Alzheimer's. And he was no longer able to practice his medical profession. Now, it turned out that this woman, this scientist, his daughter, was working on a medication that was precisely to address that kind of Alzheimer's that her father had. And if he would have had that medication, he would still be treating patients to this day. And this scientist woman, who is normally very, clinical, she had tears pouring down her face as she told the story. And so, what message do you get there, Artem, from that story?
Several of them. One is it's personal. It's for her, it's not a business task. It's personal. And secondly, if I ever choose some kind of a doctor or a pill in that way, well, I hope it doesn't happen, but I know that the quality and the dedication are there 200%. Like,
so you see, now, if she were to just say, I'm a very dedicated doctor, my father was a doctor, and, and my research is, I'm very passionate about my research. That's not a story. That's an interpretation. She's telling me what to think.
Yeah. But Murray, and here's the question in that way. Do we need to think what moral or what do we want the audience to think? Or do we just focus on our intention? Like, for example, my intention is to sell a storytelling training, for example. And I tell a story of how I got into a situation where I failed a sale, a huge one, that led to me being fired afterwards. And I know that there was this sales guy who really picked it up and nailed it. And he just closed it. And he used storytelling because I know that guy and blah, blah, blah. And the moral I am thinking, is it even valuable to think about a moral of the story before I tell it? Or do we need to focus on intention and just leave the moral alone?
I think that even if we start to think about the word moral, the moral of the story is that there's a lesson that you're trying to put into your story, right? It's a life lesson. And I'm not so interested in life lessons. I don't think that all of us are so wise that we can go around giving life lessons. I think it's much more about the intention. What's your intention? And I've only ever got one intention, Artem, really. And I talk about that in my book. It's called The Lion's Gaze. I'm from South Africa. We have a lot of lions there. When you throw a ball to a dog, the dog always watches the ball. But when you throw a ball to a lion, the lion keeps his gaze on you, or her gaze. So when I am talking to someone, my lion's gaze is always on the audience, on connecting with the audience. So yes, that's it. You were looking down at something. I'm just wondering, is everything, are we running out of time? Oh, I can't hear you.
I heard a disconnection and I saw my mic went up, so just not to mess with your listening. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. But what I noticed, you see, you were making such good eye contact with me, and suddenly you started looking down. And all of a sudden, I'm so aware of the fact that your listening has changed. And so my speaking suddenly gets a little bit changed because I'm wondering, oh, you're being distracted by something. That's how sensitive we have to be to this. Not, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm just demonstrating what happens. So anyhow, Artem, the intention is always to connect to the audience. That's your intention. And the intention, but you know, that's the uber intention. That's the major intention, or what you described as the meta intention. And then you start off with, well, what do you want? Why are you connecting to the audience? Why am I connecting to you right now? Because you're very interested in my method, and I'm very interested in sharing this method as widely across the world as I can. So that's my intention today, was just to have a connect with you and to see how this method would land for someone who's practicing in Russia.
That's great. I see that you've gone even higher in that chain, like not an intention to sell or to but the intention to connect. This is essential. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course. Can we go to the last two questions, Artem?
Yes, and those will be a blitz questions, to tell the truth. I ask all storytellers I meet about them, and I'm really interested in what you think about them. So the first one, what would be your advice for someone who wants to develop their storytelling skills and is in the beginning of their journey? What would you advise them to do?
They've got to ask themselves the question. They've got to realize that there are many different ways of communicating in the world. You can tell someone what to think. You can present people with thousands of numbers. You can give them charts and graphs and all sorts of data. A story is something different. A story is something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and is intended to connect the mind with the heart. So if you want to tell a story, it's because there's something very, very specific that you want to communicate and you want the person to remember it. So you first have to ask yourself the question, why do I want to tell a story right now? Why is now the moment to tell this story? You have to start off with that question. You have to know why you're going to be sharing. And of course, in my case, we're talking about personal stories here. Why is this the moment to share a personal story with the audience? So we really need to start with that question.
Great. I feel a presence of something close to Simon Sinek, but obviously that concept is not from the 90s. So yeah, thinking of the why.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes, I think that is quite close to what he talks about. Simon Sinek, exactly. It's you've got to be thinking about what's driving this. What's the fire in the belly that's making you want to tell the story?
Great. Okay, and the second question is about the story itself. And I would like you to finish a phrase I made up. It goes like this. If it took one thing to get from a good story to a great story, what would that one thing be?
Know your ending. You've got to have a satisfactory ending. And the whole story has to be directed towards your ending. In other words, every single detail that you add to the story has to in some way serve that ending. So by knowing what your ending is and by directing your attention towards your ending, you're not going to put in a whole lot of irrelevant information that's going to cause your listeners to go to sleep. You know where you're going. And so when you're telling a story, know where you're going, and your ending tells you where you're going.
Great. That's something strict to follow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Murray, it was a real pleasure to have your speaking. And what really pleased me is to have your listening here today with me. Thank you so much for your time. That was amazing. Can you give can you give some context of yours so the folks around here can find you as to wrap up?
Of course. So if you want to go to our website, that's going to be the best way to learn about Narativ, my company. And so it's www.narativ.com. So let me give that to you again, www.narativ.com. And there you'll find all the contact information that you need to be in touch with us, as well as a number of different videos and resources that share our method with you.
Thank you so much. I will definitely put a link in the description for our interview. Thank you once again.
Thanks, Artem.